Thanks for tuning in to Echoes of Cheating. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Evelyn Grant lived by one rule: control the narrative. At 43, she was the embodiment of ambition, a woman who had molded herself into a symbol of power in a male-dominated industry. From her childhood in a working-class neighborhood to her rise as CEO of Grant Global Ventures, Evelyn had fought for every inch of her success. Her mansion in the Hamptons was a monument to that journey, sleek, modern, and immaculate, its glass walls offering a pristine view of the Atlantic Ocean. Tonight, her home shimmered like a diamond. Chandeliers cast a golden glow across marble floors, while the November sunset painted the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender. The scene outside was a tableau of sophistication, waiters weaving through the gathering with trays of champagne, a jazz quartet playing under a heated pavilion, and guests from the upper echelons of business and politics mingling in tailored suits and glittering gowns. This evening marked a milestone. 15 years of Grant Global Ventures dominating the tech landscape. Evelyn moved through the crowd with the ease of a practiced performer. Her emerald green silk dress clung to her athletic frame, the colour chosen specifically to highlight her auburn hair and command attention. By her side was her husband Matthew, a charming attorney whose easy demeanour balanced her intensity, and her younger brother Eric, who had recently joined her company as the head of innovation. Together, they presented a picture of unity, a family in sync with success. The toast came at sunset. Evelyn stood on a raised platform, her crystal glass catching the last light of day. "To resilience," she began, her voice strong and assured. 15 years ago, this company started as an idea. Today, it's a global force because of the brilliant minds in this room and because of the unshakable foundation of trust. Her words were met with applause, the sound echoing across the estate. Evelyn caught Matthew's proud smile and Eric's encouraging nod. For a fleeting moment, she felt untouchable. Yet, as the applause faded, Evelyn's gaze shifted to Matthew and Eric, standing together near the bar. Something in their exchange, a quick glance, a whispered word, triggered an unease she couldn't place. The way Matthew leaned in slightly toward Eric, his hand briefly touching his shoulder, struck Evelyn as oddly intimate. The moment passed in seconds, but it lingered in her mind like a splinter. Her instincts were sharper than most. Years of corporate battles had honed her ability to read the subtlest signs of deception. She brushed the unease aside, refocusing on her guests and maintaining her perfectly curated smile. Still, her mind worked in the background, filing the interaction away like an anomaly in a system, one she would analyze later. By the time the party ended, Evelyn was back in control, waving goodbye to the last guest from the grand entryway. She leaned against the door for a moment, letting the cool evening air settle over her. Matthew appeared beside her, his tie loosened, a glass of scotch in his hand. "You were perfect tonight," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And you're the consummate partner," Evelyn replied, kissing his cheek. But as he turned away to pour himself another drink, Evelyn's smile faltered. A disquiet stirred in her chest. Not yet a storm, just a shift in the wind. Eric was already in the guest wing, presumably preparing for his early flight. Evelyn lingered by her bedroom window, watching the waves lap at the shoreline. Perfection, she mused, was a fragile illusion. It demanded constant vigilance, constant reinvention. And when cracks appeared, no matter how small, they had to be addressed before they spread. For now, the cracks were invisible to anyone but her. But Evelyn Grant didn't reach the pinnacle of her career by ignoring anomalies. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Evelyn resolved to uncover its roots. Because if there was one thing she couldn't abide, it was betrayal. Especially from within her fortress. Evelyn Grant's unease grew in the weeks following her company's anniversary celebration. What had initially been a faint whisper of suspicion now buzzed incessantly in her mind. She had dismissed the exchange between Matthew and Eric that night as the trick of her overworked imagination, but the subtle signs refused to disappear. Her husband and brother, the two people she trusted most in the world, were starting to feel like strangers. Matthew's behavior was the first to change. He began taking late-night phone calls, his voice barely a murmur as he stepped out of their bedroom and into the hallway. He had always been a workaholic. Evelyn admired that about him. But now, his work seemed to take him to strange places. Business trips were extended without explanation. Meetings appeared on his calendar with people she'd never heard him mention before. When she casually asked about them, his answers were vague, dismissive. Evelyn didn't press. Not at first. After all, Matthew had stood by her through the grueling early years of her career, sacrificing his own ambitions to support hers. Still, the growing distance between them was undeniable. The warmth in his smile had cooled, replaced by something she could only describe as a calculated detachment. Eric, meanwhile, became unusually evasive. As the head of innovation, he was supposed to oversee Grant Global Ventures' next generation projects. Yet when Evelyn scheduled meetings to review progress, he was often too busy or out of the office. The few updates he did provide were littered with jargon, but lacked substance. Evelyn noticed small discrepancies in his financial reports, minor deviations that might have escaped the notice of someone less particular. One evening, she found herself alone in her study, poring over spreadsheets from Eric's division. The numbers didn't add up. Several transactions led to an account registered under a nondescript holding company. It wasn't a significant amount of money, but it was enough to catch her attention. Evelyn had built her empire on discipline, and she knew how easily small lapses could snowball into catastrophic problems. Her gut told her to dig deeper. The decision to investigate Matthew came almost on impulse. It happened during another one of his late-night calls. He had stepped into the bathroom, leaving his phone unattended on the bedside table. Evelyn stared at the device for what felt like an eternity before picking it up. Evelyn stared at the device for what felt like an eternity before stumping it out. The security system started gasping. The girl was too alarmed. What she found was worse than anything she had imagined. The messages were succinct but damning. Text exchanges with Eric revealed a detailed plan to undermine her authority at Grant Global Ventures. They had been slowly lobbying board members, planting doubts about her leadership. Eric had falsified financial documents, and Matthew had leveraged his connections with influential investors to orchestrate a takeover. Together, they intended to seize control of the company that Evelyn had poured her life into. Her hands trembled as she read the messages, but her face remained calm. Years of corporate maneuvering had taught her to keep her emotions in check. Matthew emerged from the bathroom moments later, towel around his neck. "You're still awake?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes guarded. "I couldn't sleep," Evelyn replied, placing the phone back on the table without missing a beat. She smiled at him, a picture of wifely warmth, as though nothing had changed. But inside, something cold and steely had begun to take shape. In the days that followed, Evelyn delved deeper into their conspiracy. She hired a private investigator to trace the holding company linked to Eric's division. It didn't take long to confirm her suspicions. The account was being used to funnel money to key board members. Meanwhile, Matthew had been meeting with prominent stakeholders under the guise of networking. Together, they were laying the groundwork for a hostile takeover. The betrayal cut deeper than Evelyn could have anticipated. Matthew wasn't just her husband. He had been her partner, her confidant, the person who knew her darkest fears and greatest aspirations. And Eric, her baby brother, was the one person she thought would always have her back. Their collusion felt like a knife twisted in her ribs. Evelyn couldn't let them see her pain. At family dinners and board meetings, she remained composed, even playful. She laughed at Eric's jokes and listened intently as Matthew recounted his supposed work trips. Beneath her calm exterior, she was mapping out every move, every detail of their betrayal. She couldn't afford a misstep. One wrong move, and they would tighten their grip on her company. During a quiet weekend at the Hamptons mansion, Evelyn took her subterfuge a step further. She invited Eric over for a casual dinner, just the two of them. Over wine, she steered the conversation toward his role at the company, feigning admiration for his recent successes. "You've really come into your own, Eric," she said. "Dad would be so proud of you." Eric's smile faltered for a split second. It was a small crack, but Evelyn saw it. "Thanks, sis. That means a lot." "Of course," she continued. Her tone lied. "You know, I've been thinking about shifting more responsibilities your way. Maybe even letting you take the lead on some major projects." Eric's eyes lit up, but his response was measured. "That's generous of you, Evie. I'd love to discuss that." By the time dinner ended, Evelyn had gleaned just enough information to confirm her next steps. Eric had grown overconfident, his answers revealing more than he intended. Evelyn felt the stirrings of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Upstairs, as Matthew slept soundly beside her, Evelyn sat by the window, staring out at the darkened waves. The cracks in her once perfect life were now fissures, but they hadn't broken her. Not yet. Evelyn Grant had survived too much to let her world crumble now. Her enemies had underestimated her, and that was their first mistake. Evelyn Grant was no stranger to betrayal, but nothing in her life had prepared her for this. The weight of discovering her husband's and brother's conspiracy pressed down on her chest like a vice. Yet as the days passed, her resolve hardened. She refused to crumble, not when everything she had worked for, everything she had built with her blood, sweat, and ambition, was at stake. Betrayal had always been a possibility in the cutthroat world of business, but to find it at home, among those she trusted most, was a wound deeper than any boardroom betrayal. She didn't confront them. Confrontation would expose her cards too early, and Evelyn had no intention of giving her adversaries the upper hand. Instead, she played the long game. For every kind word she gave Matthew, for every sibling joke she shared with Eric, she was calculating her next move. They thought they were clever, but Evelyn was the queen of precision. Her patience, sharpened by years of corporate maneuvering, would serve her well. She began by systematically gathering evidence. Her private investigator continued to deliver damning details, forged signatures on financial documents, offshore accounts linked to Eric, and recorded conversations between Matthew and influential board members. One chilling recording revealed Linda, Evelyn's most trusted executive, whispering in conspiratorial tones about how they could smooth the transition. Linda's involvement stung almost as much as Matthew's. Evelyn had mentored Linda, shaping her career and supporting her through personal challenges. To find her actively colluding with Eric and Matthew was an unexpected blow. Evelyn knew she couldn't rely on emotions now. Betrayal, she reminded herself, didn't discriminate between family, friends, or protégés. It thrived where trust existed, and Evelyn had built an empire on trust. One evening, Evelyn found herself sitting at the dining table with Matthew and Eric. The kitchen staff had prepared an elaborate meal, but the food on Evelyn's plate remained untouched. Matthew was recounting a story about an investor meeting, his voice as smooth and charming as ever. Eric laughed at all the right moments, adding his own anecdotes, weaving a perfect tapestry of familiar warmth. Evelyn watched them with detached amusement. They were so confident, so utterly convinced of their brilliance, that neither seemed to notice her eyes lingering too long on their faces or the questions she peppered them with under the guise of casual curiosity. "It's funny," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "How often do you two talk? I mean, outside of work." Matthew's fork paused midair. He exchanged a quick glance with Eric, one of those subtle exchanges Evelyn had become attuned to. "Not as often as we'd like," Matthew said smoothly, recovering. "Work keeps us both busy." Eric chuckled nervously. "Yeah, Evie. It's hard to find time between everything you've got me doing at the company and Matthew's insane client schedule." Their answers were perfect. Too perfect. Evelyn smiled, letting the conversation drift back to safer topics. She had learned enough. The familiarity between them was too casual, too rehearsed. They were coordinating more than just schedules. As the days passed, Evelyn stepped up her efforts. The hidden cameras and microphones she had discreetly placed in key locations, their bedroom, Matthew's study, and even Eric's office at Grant Global Ventures, provided a steady stream of intelligence. It wasn't enough to confirm their betrayal. Evelyn needed to understand their endgame. One late evening, the feeds delivered gold. Eric was in his office, pacing as he spoke into his phone. "I know she's distracted with the international acquisition," Eric said, his voice clipped. "This is the perfect time to move forward. The board is practically ours. Linda's locked down and Matthew says the investors are on board." Evelyn froze, her heart pounding as she leaned closer to her laptop. She hit the record button. "What about the transition plan?" Eric asked. "We need to make sure she doesn't have a way back in." The voice on the other end was faint, but Evelyn could make out Matthew's reply. We'll finalize it at the next meeting. Just keep her focused on the acquisition. She won't see it coming." Evelyn sat back, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. They were brazen, almost reckless in their plotting. It confirmed what she suspected. They underestimated her. That arrogance would be their downfall. Her counterattack began in earnest. Evelyn couldn't risk a full confrontation yet, so she sowed seeds of doubt within their carefully laid plans. She called for an audit of Eric's division, framing it as routine. She assigned Linda to oversee a critical project in Europe, ensuring she was too preoccupied to assist Matthew and Eric. Then, Evelyn began leveraging her network. She reached out to board members individually, subtly reminding them of her vision and the sacrifices she had made to lead the company. Without directly addressing the coup, she planted the idea that loyalty to her was loyalty to the company's success. One by one, the pieces began to shift. Evelyn's quiet manipulation created ripples that Matthew and Eric didn't seem to notice. They continued their plans, oblivious to the growing resistance around them. The cracks in their facade appeared one evening when Evelyn found Matthew in his study, staring at his laptop with a deep frown. She leaned against the doorframe, her tone casual. "Long day?" He startled, quickly closing his laptop. "Just reviewing some contracts," he said, his voice too light. "You know how it is." Evelyn nodded, pretending not to notice his nervous energy. "Of course. Let me know if you need my input." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Always." Later that night, Evelyn reviewed his activity through the software she had installed on his laptop. The files he had been reviewing were draft agreements for a board restructuring. The proposed changes would strip Evelyn of her decision-making power and reassign key responsibilities to Matthew and Eric. It was worse than she had imagined. They didn't just want her company, they wanted her silenced. Her final breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the junior employees in Eric's division approached her after a company meeting. A nervous young man named David, he hesitated before handing her a USB drive. "I don't know if I'm overstepping," he stammered, but I thought you should see this." Evelyn waited until she was alone in her office to review the files. What she found was explosive. Emails between Eric, Matthew, and Linda, detailing their strategy for the hostile takeover. The messages were explicit, leaving no room for misinterpretation. They planned to announce their move at the next board meeting, painting Evelyn as distracted and out of touch. It was the confirmation she needed. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drafted her response. Her counterstrike would need to be precise, devastating, and final. Every detail had to be perfect. She reviewed the evidence she'd collected, preparing to unveil the depth of their betrayal to the board. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at Grant Global Ventures with her head held high. She called an emergency board meeting, her calm demeanor betraying none of the storm raging within her. Matthew and Eric were already seated when she walked in, their confidence palpable. They believed they were about to seize victory. Evelyn smiled as she placed a thick folder on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "I've called this meeting to address a matter of utmost importance." As she opened the folder, revealing the damning evidence, she relished the flicker of panic that crossed Matthew's and Eric's faces. The web they had spun so carefully was about to unravel. Thread by thread, piece by piece, Evelyn had been the spider all along. Evelyn Grant's plan to counter her husband's and brother's betrayal unfolded like a masterfully executed chess game. Every move was calculated, every action precise. She knew that rushing into confrontation would only give her enemies the upper hand. So she played the long game, dismantling their conspiracy piece by piece while maintaining the illusion of ignorance. Her first step was to secure her position. Evelyn called in her most trusted allies, discreetly, of course. These were individuals who had stood by her during the early days of Grant Global Ventures, loyal board members, an old mentor from her first corporate job, and even an outside consultant she trusted implicitly. She framed their involvement as preparation for a critical restructuring to fortify the company during the upcoming acquisition. It was a plausible pretext, and none of them suspected the real reason for the changes. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her covert surveillance. Every text, every email, and every whispered conversation between Matthew and Eric was meticulously documented. She built a case so damning that no one could deny the betrayal. Through her private investigator, she uncovered even more: secret meetings with rival firms, the forging of her digital signature on financial documents, and Matthew's efforts to sway board members with promises of higher dividends once Evelyn was ousted. The next phase of Evelyn's plan involved isolating the conspirators. She started with Linda, the trusted executive who had betrayed her. Evelyn reassigned Linda to a high-stakes project in Paris, citing her expertise as the reason for the overseas placement. Linda, blinded by ambition, accepted the role without hesitation. The distance effectively removed her from the inner circle, making it harder for her to coordinate with Matthew and Eric. Evelyn also began quietly reshaping the board. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with key members, ostensibly to discuss the company's future. Over coffee and lunch, she subtly planted doubts about Matthew and Eric, questioning their judgment without outright accusing them. "I've noticed some unusual decisions coming from Eric's department," she'd say, with a concerned tone, or "Matthew seems distracted lately. Have you seen anything to suggest that?" These conversations left the board members unsettled, creating a ripple of uncertainty that Evelyn knew she could capitalize on later. Simultaneously, Evelyn ordered a top-secret internal audit of the company's finances. She ensured that the auditors reported directly to her, bypassing both Eric and Matthew. The results were as damning as she'd anticipated. Funds had been siphoned into offshore accounts, and the paper trail led directly to Eric's division. The audit report was the final nail in the coffin, a weapon Evelyn knew she'd use when the time was right. At home, Evelyn maintained her facade as the dutiful wife and sister. She laughed at Matthew's jokes over dinner, listened to Eric's half-hearted updates about his innovative projects, and even joined them for a family game night, all the while seething beneath her composed exterior. Each smile she gave was a lie, each laugh a calculated act. Her restraint was her greatest weapon, and she wielded it like a blade. One evening, Matthew mentioned a charity gala they were hosting in 2 weeks. "I thought it'd be good for the company's image," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. You've been so busy lately, I figured I'd take this one off your plate." Evelyn raised an eyebrow but kept her tone light. "That's thoughtful of you. I'll make sure to free up my schedule for it." In reality, she saw the gala as an opportunity. Public events were Matthew's and Eric's preferred battleground, where they thrived on charm and manipulation. Evelyn decided it would be where she struck her first blow. As the gala approached, Evelyn worked behind the scenes to set her plan into motion. She invited several key journalists known for their investigative prowess and planted anonymous tips about corporate malfeasance at Grant Global Ventures. She also ensured that certain board members attended, including those she knew were wavering in their loyalty to her. The night of the gala, Evelyn was a vision of poise and elegance in a deep sapphire gown that sparkled under the chandelier light. Matthew stayed close to her side, playing the role of the supportive husband, while Eric mingled effortlessly with the guests. Evelyn smiled and laughed as though she hadn't a care in the world. At the peak of the evening, Evelyn took the stage to give a speech. She thanked the attendees, spoke of the company's achievements, and hinted at exciting projects on the horizon. But then, her tone shifted. "In the spirit of transparency," she said, her voice firm but calm, "I want to address some rumours that have recently come to my attention. Rumours of financial impropriety within our company." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "Grant Global Ventures has always prided itself on integrity. That's why I've commissioned an independent audit to ensure that every aspect of our business reflects the values we hold dear." Matthew's glass froze halfway to his lips. Eric, standing by the bar, went pale. Evelyn's smile didn't waver. She concluded her speech with an invitation for everyone to enjoy the evening and stepped off the stage, leaving the room buzzing with speculation. The aftermath of the gala was immediate. The press latched onto Evelyn's announcement, and whispers of an internal investigation spread like wildfire. Board members began asking questions, demanding answers that Matthew and Eric couldn't provide. Evelyn watched, with quiet satisfaction, as the conspirators struggled to maintain control. Her next move came during an emergency board meeting that she called a week later. Armed with the audit report, Evelyn presented her findings with surgical precision. She detailed the financial discrepancies, the offshore accounts, and the unauthorized use of her digital signature. She didn't name names, but the implications were clear. Matthew tried to deflect. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice strained. "We need more time to sort through these allegations." Eric nodded in agreement, his usual bravado replaced by nervous energy. "Exactly. These numbers could mean anything." Evelyn let them flail for a moment before delivering the final blow. She produced a signed affidavit from the auditors and correspondents tying Eric to the accounts in question. "The evidence speaks for itself," she said, her voice icy. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is fraud." The board voted unanimously to suspend Eric from his position pending further investigation. Evelyn then turned to Matthew. "Given the circumstances, I think it's best if you step down as my proxy on the board," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We need to restore trust, and that starts here." Matthew stared at her, his mask of calm slipping. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn saw fear in his eyes. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. By the end of the day, Evelyn had reclaimed control of her company, but she knew the battle wasn't over. Matthew and Eric were wounded, but they weren't out of the fight. Evelyn returned to her office that evening, watching the city lights twinkle below as she sipped a glass of wine. The web her enemies had spun was unraveling, but she couldn't rest. Not yet. Betrayal, she had learned, didn't die easily. But neither did she. The fallout from Evelyn's strategic counterattack reverberated far beyond the walls of Grant Global Ventures. Eric was disgraced, removed from his position and facing legal scrutiny for his financial manipulations. Matthew's reputation, both as a husband and as a corporate figure, lay in tatters. Evelyn filed for divorce, her lawyers ensuring he left with little more than the clothes on his back. Publicly, Evelyn was victorious, her company secure, her integrity intact. But victory often came at a cost, and Evelyn was no stranger to paying the price. Evelyn's mornings now began in solitude. The house, once filled with Matthew's morning radio chatter and Eric's occasional weekend visits, was quiet. She embraced the silence, her routine methodical. An early run along the beach, a black coffee in her glass-walled study, and the endless emails and reports that demanded her attention. The routine kept her grounded, though the wounds of betrayal still ached. The press framed her as a phoenix rising from the ashes, a symbol of resilience. Headlines touted her as a modern-day titan, surviving a coup within her own walls. But Evelyn knew better than to let herself be swayed by public adulation. The storm wasn't over, it had simply shifted. The evidence was in the details, subtle changes that gnawed at the edges of her piece. It started with the envelope. One evening, as Evelyn was wrapping up her workday, a courier delivered a plain, unmarked envelope. She opened it, expecting routine legal documents. Instead, she found a single sheet of paper with an ominous message scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting. "This isn't over, E." Evelyn's initial reaction was a mix of anger and disbelief. The arrogance of Eric. After everything he had done to threaten her so boldly, it was almost laughable. But, as the words sank in, Evelyn's corporate instincts kicked in. This was more than a taunt. It was a warning. She immediately called her head of security, Daniel, and handed him the note. "Analyze this," she ordered. "I want to know who sent it, when, and how." As Daniel left, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Eric was down, but he wasn't out. He had always been resourceful, and though she had dismantled his scheme, she doubted he would go quietly into obscurity. If Eric had any lingering alliances within the company, she needed to root them out before he could use them against her. The next day, Evelyn met with her core team of loyal executives. She had spent years cultivating this circle of trust, but recent events had taught her that trust could be fleeting. "I need a comprehensive review of our cybersecurity," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Everything, from email servers to personal devices. Leave no stone unturned." One of her senior tech leads, Claire, hesitated. "Do you think there's still a threat, Evelyn?" Evelyn's eyes met Claire's, her gaze unflinching. "I don't think, Claire. I know." Within days, the security team uncovered a breach. It wasn't recent, but it was deliberate. A back door had been left open in the company's systems, a vulnerability someone could exploit to siphon sensitive data. The trail led back to Eric's department, but the execution was sophisticated. Beyond Eric's technical skills, Evelyn's mind immediately turned to Linda. Though she was no longer at the company, Linda's role in the conspiracy had been pivotal. Evelyn made a mental note to dig deeper into Linda's connections. If Eric had managed to maintain contact with her, they could still pose a threat. Meanwhile, the personal side of the betrayal lingered like a shadow over her life. The divorce proceedings were progressing, but Matthew's attempts to negotiate left Evelyn seething. His latest proposal included a demand for spousal support, a laughable request, given the circumstances. Evelyn's lawyer assured her that Matthew's case was weak, but the audacity of his demands only fueled her resolve to cut ties completely. One evening, as Evelyn reviewed documents in her study, she received a call from an unknown number. She debated ignoring it, but ultimately answered, her voice clipped. "Evelyn Grant." "Evelyn, it's Linda." The room seemed to go still. Evelyn gripped the phone tightly. "What do you want?" "I know I betrayed you," Linda began, her voice trembling, "but you need to know. Eric isn't finished. He's been working with someone, a competitor." Evelyn's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this now?" Because I made a mistake, and I want to make it right," Linda said. "He approached me a few weeks ago, asking me to leak information about the upcoming acquisition. I refused, but I think he's found someone else." Evelyn's mind raced. If Eric was colluding with a competitor, it wasn't just her company's reputation at stake, it was its future. Linda's warning proved accurate. Over the next week, Evelyn's team discovered a pattern of unusual activity. Confidential files accessed from external IPs, key acquisition details appearing in the media before they were officially announced. Someone was feeding information to outsiders. Evelyn tightened the circle around her most sensitive projects, implementing new protocols and personally overseeing the highest priority tasks. She also took a more aggressive stance against Eric. Using the evidence she had collected during the initial coup, Evelyn pressed legal charges against him for fraud and embezzlement. The lawsuit was a public spectacle designed to cripple his credibility and cut off any alliances he might be leveraging. despite her precautions. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that Eric's threat extended beyond the professional. One night, as she returned home from the office, she noticed a car parked near her driveway. It wasn't unusual for journalists to camp outside her home, but this car was different. Its engine idled, its windows tinted. Evelyn ignored it, maintaining her composure as she entered the house. Once inside, she activated the state-of-the-art surveillance system she had installed after the coup. She reviewed the footage of the car, noting the license plate and forwarding it to Daniel. The next day, Daniel confirmed her suspicions. The car was registered to a shell company with ties to Eric. It was a clear sign that her brother wasn't just planning another attack. He was watching her. Evelyn decided it was time to strike preemptively. She arranged a meeting with a trusted federal investigator, presenting her findings on Eric's offshore accounts, his data breaches, and his ongoing collusion with outside forces. The investigator assured her they would look into it, but Evelyn knew that justice wouldn't come quickly. In the meantime, she braced for Eric's next move. The culmination of Evelyn's retaliation came when she publicly announced a new acquisition, a groundbreaking venture that would solidify Grant Global Ventures' dominance in the tech world. It was a move Eric could never have anticipated, one that relied on a proprietary technology she had kept under wraps. As the announcement dominated headlines, Evelyn received a single text message from an unknown number. Well played. But this isn't over. Evelyn stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. She didn't need to reply. Eric's moves had failed, and as far as she was concerned, he was already finished. The game, however, was far from over. Evelyn had learned to thrive in chaos, and if Eric wanted to keep playing, she'd be ready. After all, the Queen never abandons her throne.